So today we're going to talk about using guitar amp modeling for worship, and we're going to be talking about the Line 6 Pod series, specifically the HD500. Now, the HD500 is not the newest of the modeling, but it's actually a pretty good modeler, and I've been using modelers since Pod 2.0, so they've had a few different generations of them. There's Pod 2.0, XT, X3, and the HD series. And then the HDX series, which is essentially just more DSP in the HD series. And then they have their Helix. And so the other thing that we were going to talk about is just kind of why not a Helix? So Helix is, it's just an expense. It's a good system. It's generally expensive for most volunteers. The floor model here, they range between $1,600 to $600 for the ones that do actual full amp modeling. And then the HX effects, which is just the stomp box and the effects modeling, that doesn't have any amp simulations. Those are about $500. So there's definitely a cost to entry in there. Not to say that the HD500 is cheap. 500X brand new is about $500 or $550, although there's a lot of them on the used market. I have an HD500 with the non-X moniker, and it is, I think I paid $250 for it. It's used, and the good thing about Line 6 products, I think I've only bought one Line 6 products new. The rest of them have been used, and they've done really well as used products, and they work pretty well. So that's why we're not going to really look at the Helix line, because it's just, for most worship, you might walk into a church, and you don't know what you're walking into, and spending $1,600 on a rig to ensure that you're walking in with the greatest stuff is fine. But if not everybody has that $1,600. So if you meant $300, finding a used HD500, you can walk into any church situation, any volunteer situation, any PA situation, and be ready to play. So it does give you that flexibility. So that's why we're looking at the HD500, and it's still a valid modeler. So let me go ahead and pull up the HD500 here. So don't mind this. This is Logic in the background I'm using to record the guitar track. So right now, this is a patch that I built for a Telecaster. I'm actually playing it on a Gretsch, but I built this for my Telecaster. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It took a while to build it. Probably took me about an hour, and that's about how much most of these patches take me. And so what I want to do is I want to take you through, not necessarily building this patch, but building a patch very similar to this, and then go through kind of the different things about the HD500, and these apply to the HD500X directly as well. So we're going to go into a new patch. So there is basically no modeling going on whatsoever in this. You're probably hearing more of it from my microphone than anything. We're going to look at, first of all, the input section up here. Send, select, receive. These are getting patches to and from the pod. So if I wanted to say get this tone, we'll do a 16A. Let's say I want to get this tone, whatever the tone is from the prod. If I wanted to get it off the floorboard and into my computer to edit, I could have the pod send it to me so I can receive selected, and it'll process and send me that. If I, let's say, created a real quick amp simulation and just saved it to the pod, let's just do a AC30. Channel all the way up. Some drive. Yeah, let's say I wanted to save that to the pod. I can send selected to the pod. So now that tone's there. And so if I click away from it and I click back to it, it's going to load what's came from the pod. So that's how I got that sound. So that's how you save and send tones, individual tones to there. You can also do it with set lists and stuff like that. I just do it one tone at a time generally. Set lists are when you want to save some stuff, bulk, before doing like a software update or something like that. Next, we're going to look at the input. So input, guitar, we have guitar aux, we have guitar aux variax. This is what it does by default, and it also does a 1 meg guitar input by default. I like to switch this to auto as far as the input. And the reason for that is what it's going to do is it's going to look at the first thing in my effect, which in this case is the amp, and it's going to go, okay, this is how this amp's impedance was when I used to plug a 1/4 inch into it. And it's going to simulate that impedance. And what that means is just it's going to sound truer to the amp. That doesn't mean I'm going to leave it that way, but it just means that's my starting point is I'm going to start with it just making its mind up based on the first thing in the chain. If I added, let's say, a stomp box, like a tube drive in front of it, it's now going to change the impedance to match the tube drive. Now the impedance in the tube drive, they'll vary. So everything has its own kind of impedance and setting. And so I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to end up changing it at the end, and I'll show you why I would do that. But I'm going to put it at auto now so I don't have to think about it. Next, guitar input. It's set to guitar, auxiliary, and variax. And so what it is it's looking for an input from both the guitar input on the back of the Line 6 HD500. Also, it's looking for an input from the auxiliary port, basically the effects loop in, and a variax digital input. So it's basically set up in such a way where you can plug anything in and it works, into any channel and it works. The problem with that is, though, it kind of adds a little bit of noise to it. So if you know you're only going to be using a guitar for this, you're not going to be using the FX loop or anything like that, you can switch this over to guitar. Also, you can change this if you're doing, I've done some setups with like an acoustic and a microphone. You can actually do an acoustic and a microphone in here. Like I can do acoustic guitar here, and then input 2, I can do microphone, and it would be a left and right feed all the way through this chain. So you can set these inputs also to be global. Personally, I set them up as a preset basis because I may change this, and I do have a variax, so I might change that for a variax. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and switch this to guitar, or just use same. So it's the same input source from input source 2. Okay. And so now we're going to go ahead and look at these blocks right up here in these pictures. So for every one of these blocks, this is an effect that you can put in the chain. And there's everything from dynamic pedals for like compressors to EQs to modulation, chorus, flange, delays, drives, reverbs, volume pedals, wah pedals. Everything is an effect, and everything takes an effect block. So in this case, we have no effects on here, but we do have an amp going. So what I like to do is I like to start my tone based on what amp I'm doing. And all my tone is augmented on the amp. So it's just there reinforcing the amp sound. I'm boosting things in the amp, but at the overall amp character I don't like, well, then it's going to be one of those things where if I don't like it, it's not going to get any better if I add a pedal in front of it. It's just how I do it, how I build it. So I have to like the amp that I'm doing first. So I always start with the amp. And in this case, I'm using a Vox AC30 model. And if you don't know anything about the models that get used in here, let me recommend going to Line 6 website and grabbing a PDF that is called the Model Gallery. So let me bring it up here. This Model Gallery is essentially what amps are being created, or what amps are being modeled, and then what effects are being modeled. And so you can look at these and kind of get an idea of what amplifiers are going. So like the Blackface Double is a Blackface twin reverb. The amp that I'm using right now is a Vox AC30. And so a little bit about modeling, if you're not familiar with it. This is a 1967 Vox AC30 with a top boost circuit, but this is a very specific Vox AC30 from 1967. This is the one that Line 6 owns and is sitting in their shop. This is what they use for modeling purposes. They've basically taken this amp apart and they figured out how the circuits work and they've modeled those circuits. And so this 1967 amp model is based on their physical amp. And back in 1967, when these things were hand made and hand set up with wiring and everything like that, you could put 2 or 3 together and they all have their own little unique character to them, and you just pick which one you like. So this will sound like an AC30 as far as a genre of AC30, but it's going to sound like a very specific AC30. So if you put this with another AC30, there might be some subtle differences. And that's how modeling works. Modeling is basically modeling a very specific type of amp. So a very specific version. So if I switch this over to, let's say, that Fender Blackface that we saw at the beginning, let's go to Blackface normal channel. Let's crank our channel volume up. This sounds like the 1965 Blackface that is sitting over in Calabasas, California with Line 6. That being said, it still sounds like a twin reverb. And so with each one of these amps, when you select them, it creates a corresponding default patch with a corresponding default cabinet and a 57 on-axis microphone, because that's how you normally would mic a guitar cabinet is with a SM57 microphone. So if we look at this Blackface Twin here, this is a model of a Fender 1965 model Blackface Twin. I can crank up the drive if I want. They're generally a very clean amp. Sounds just like it. The only thing it's missing is, a little, let's go to the reverb real quick here. 1963, like a little spring reverb. That's all it's missing. Okay, so that model's pretty good and it sounds okay. It sounds okay. I like it. What we're emulating here is clearly not an amplifier in the same room as me. What we're modeling and emulating is an amplifier in a recording environment. So I'm sitting in a control room. The amplifier's in its own room with a microphone in front of it, and there's a certain amount of room tone that's leaking into the microphone, and what I'm hearing is that either in my headphones or my studio monitors. So keep in mind, this is never going to feel like an amp in the room. It's going to feel like an amp being mic'd up, and you're hearing that, which is, quite frankly, how mixers, hear. If you were to bring an amp on stage with you on Sunday mornings, you would basically put a microphone in front of that amp, and that's what the sound would hit in the PA. So you're getting a very same feel. Now, with that being said, it's still a modeled sound, and there's still some things that, they don't feel quite the same. And so that's where these extra little amp parameters come in here. So the first one is the amp parameters, and then there's a cabinet parameters. I like to mess with the amp parameters a little bit. One of the parameters that I like to mess with is just master and just leave it all the way up. It's up by default. So it's basically saying, hey, this is the power amp section. I can technically turn that down if I wanted to. Why you'd ever want to do that, I don't know. This is going to give you the full tube saturation. There's sag. Sag is basically, the word is spongy or gooey, and it's really kind of a weird thing to to say, but it's how your guitar responds when you pluck the strings. So if I were to turn the sag all the way down, if I turn the sag all the way down, there's not really a whole lot of dynamic response. It's pretty in your face the minute I hit a string. If I turn my sag up, the harder I hit, the more dynamic it gets. So it gives me a little bit more of dynamic range. For some play styles that's good, for some play styles that's bad. So I usually mess with the sag to taste. I usually turn it up slightly. It also does some things with the tone and kind of gets some strings to blend in a little bit more. It's kind of just something that it's just kind of how the tube or the amp responds to how much let's say how much signal you're feeding it. And so does it take that signal and just throw it into the preamp, or does it kind of hold back a little bit? And so sag all the way up means it holds back a little bit, which means you can go, like I'm going to finger pick real quick here. But you can see that I kind of increased my dynamics and the sag let me do that. If I turned it all the way down and I started finger picking, and you can even see up here on the waveform, this was the first time I played, very quiet for the first parts of finger picking, and with the sag all the way down, it kind of compressed my dynamic range. So it's kind of amp compression, built-in amp compression. So I don't like very compressed signals, so I'll usually add a little bit of sag to it, because I'm probably going to add a compressor to it to bring back some of that. Bringing back some string volume like equalization, so I'll just add a little sag to it to counter that. The next one is hum, and so if I turn up hum, you can literally hear it. You are adding hum to your amp. It's interesting. However, you can take it all the way out too, and there's no hum. And I want you to listen to the notes just ring out on this chord. Now I want to add some hum, put it back up to the default, and I want to do that again. If you listen to the low end, you'll hear slight tremolo. So I'm talking over it. Let me do it one more time. It's a very subtle tremolo. I'll over crank it and we'll see if we can get it to appear a little bit more. And what it is, it's adding a 60 cycle hum to your guitar. And so it may also cause some notes to ring out, but it's making it part of your guitar sound. Now, when you go extreme, it basically creates a buzz and an amp, hum to the amp, which is not pleasant. But if you like, you can kind of subtly hear that. It's very subtle. It's very subtle. I don't generally mess with this, but I don't generally turn it down either. So, okay. Bias and bias X, or a bias excursion, are just basically adjusting how the tube deals with compression. So kind of like the sag and the bias. I generally don't mess with the bias terribly much, but I turned up the excursion. I'm going to try turning it down. And we just put it back up in the center again. So going either direction kind of changes how it compresses the signal in the tube and and it's almost how you get your distortion. This is for probably the power amp section. I don't mess with this too much, but it is something like SAG. You just got to play with it, and it's more about how it feels when you play it rather than what you hear. SAG is a little bit more noticeable to hear, but bias is just kind of how you feel and play it. So moving on, we're going to go to cab parameters. So there's low cut, resonance level, thump, decay. So first one I like to look at is low cut. If you got a sound guy, he's probably already doing this to your channel anyway. It doesn't really have a value over here when you turn the knob there. Shows you just how much it's putting in. But I'll go extreme real quick here and so it's a low cut, kind of like on the microphone preamp or something like that. You can add it back. Its default is 20 kilohertz. I kind of put it up to something like 50 hertz. If you have a sound guy who's already doing a low cut on you, maybe don't have to mess with that. But it's just nice to know it's there. Some cabinets get really bassy. Some of the Marshall cabinets do. Then resonance level is just how long the speaker kind of rings out. So if you turn that up, so you can just see when you turn it up, you get a little bit more low end ringing out. I don't really mess with it, but if anything, I might increase it just a tad. Thump is the one that I really like. It kind of it adds some of that amp into the room feel, the thump that you get from a speaker cabinet into your ears. Kind of adds attack to the speaker is what I see it. So if I turn it down, and add it back in. So I really like adding thump to the cabinet. I generally don't go overboard on these, but they're just especially if I go to my bridge pickup or my neck pickup. And you got decay. That's just exactly what it is how much the speakers kind of decay. Less subtle than the resonance. So that's it. Those are the advanced parameters, and usually I'll add some thump and I'll add some low, maybe some low cut, maybe not. If you add thump, and the low cut might cut it out. So that's what I'll do. Then there's a plethora of other things that you can do. So on this particular cab, you have drive for this amp, drive, bass, mid, treble, presence, channel volume, and you have ER. ER is essentially the room sound that you get, what you get. So like a mic in a room, you might get some room tone in there. So it's by default, it's 11%. And so when you play it, there's a little bit of echo in there. And I forgot we have this spring reverb on, so let's turn that off. So let's go back to this and we'll go. So you're not getting a whole lot of room tone because the mic is essentially inches from the speaker cabinet, and all you're getting is that sound. But if you were to add some room, you kind of get that speaker room kind of feel, kind of like what thump does. It adds little things to it just to give you like this sense that it's in a room somewhere. So adds a little bit of realism. The next things I look at is microphones. So 57's on axis. It means the microphone is pointed right between where the round part of the speaker meets the cone itself. That's usually where on axis is. Off axis means it's pointed in that direction, but it's pointed a little to the side. So it's not angled and pointed straight at it. It's angled to the side. So it actually makes it a little less high sensitive. So yeah, there's definitely some difference there. 409 dynamic is a bigger diaphragm dynamic microphone. 421 adds a little bit more mids than that. A 438 ribbon. That added a lot of low end, so you'd want to do a low cut or adjust your thump on that one. A 121 ribbon. Got some mids back. 67 condenser, I like this one. And if we want to Jimi Hendrix it, we can do the Neumann U87 condenser. So those are those microphones. And now so far we've been dealing with an amp with a paired cabinet. You can separate this. We could do a blackface twin with some 412 greenbacks that would be normally in a Marshall cabinet. So let's do that. This is where that low cut might be very helpful. So there you go. Got a big a Marshall cabinet. You can do 30-watt speaker. You could go down to a, let's see, a 6x9, almost like a car stereo speaker. So you lose some of that low end from that. You can do a 112 Bluebell. This is from like an AC-15. Or you can do a, let's see, 115 from a bass amp. That's kind of beefy. And this one you get different microphones on because it's a bass amp. So you can get a U47. '57 on axis. Yeah, with bass amps, there's definitely more options. I generally stick to using that with a bass. There's Blackface Lux. We were using an Ubershaw. And every time you switch to it, it's going to switch to the microphone it thinks it should be you should be using for that cabinet. Obviously, you can make different changes. So that's kind of the amps in a nutshell. So let me do this. Let's get rid of this this effect here. Cancel that out, and then I'm going to go to the amp that I usually do the most, which is the AC30 top boost. We're going to crank up the channel volume so we can saturate the tubes. We're going to go add a little thump to it. Not very much. I'm going to add a little resonance to it, and I am going to play with the sag a little bit and add a little hum. So it'll sound like this. And it's too quiet, so I'm going to crank up the drive. That might be too much, so let me dial that back a little bit. And then we're gonna switch the cab. We're gonna go to a greenback 412, and we are gonna go to a U67. I'm going to go straight up and down on everything. And I'm going to add a little presence, which will add a little height. Just for now, I'm going to go ahead and turn that one off, and we're going to pan this one center. So there's like a little mixer post amp, and you can do some cool stereo effects, which we'll talk about later. But I'm going to give me just a little bit more volume. So again, my amp philosophy is to build the amp. I want to get a good tone out of this amp from the default. So I'm going to spend a little time here trying to find a good tone. So on this bridge, I got a little bit of mids, and there's no mid control here. It's a high frequency cut. So I'm going to boost the treble up just a little bit. I'm going to give me some room tone. Let's do around 30%. And so I'm just important to note, I guess the guitar that I'm using is a Gretsch. It's got the TV-tron pickups, and it's got a Bigsby. So I'm switching between bridge and neck and the middle pickup to try to get an idea of what the sounds are. I always build my sound to my specific guitar. And the reason why you would do that is because the guitar is, you know, a good significant chunk of your sound as well as the amp. So you want the amp to kind of match and complement the guitar. So if I have some single coils on here, I'm going to have to crank this drive up a little hotter, because the input on the single coils are a lot lower. If I got my Les Paul on here, I got to dial it back. It's going to be different. If I'm using my semi-hollow guitar, the bass is going to be there, and I'm going to need to cut some of that out. Maybe use some of the low cut from the amp or from the cab. So you're just going to want to build it to your guitar. Okay, so I'm gonna mess with that. We're gonna leave that at that. I'm gonna go back to making this left because we're gonna mess with some stereo stuff. So that's 100% left. We'll make this 4.5 as well, and it shouldn't sound any different. Okay, so let's start. How do I like to start? Well, that's a great clean amp sound. It is pretty close to a clean amp on the edge of breakup. So if I dig in real hard, so there's a little bit of breakup if I'm beating on it, but then if I'm finger picking, yeah, it doesn't break up at all. It's a good clean tone. So now I want to get it to break up. So that's the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do some dynamics. Now there's many different things in the dynamics. You've got a noise gate to get rid of some noise on here. Be careful when you're using or setting this up with a computer like we're doing here. If you're using single coil pickups, your computer is probably going to generate some noise. So if you take your guitar and you move it away from your computer monitor and your computer screen and the noise goes away, then I wouldn't put a noise gate in. I would hesitate about putting any sort of noise gate in, because what ends up happening is if you play a chord, that noise gate is eventually going to kick in and pull it out. So you're not going to have the same sustain. So I'd try to avoid putting a noise gate. If you got a really noisy patch, the front is where you put the noise gate generally. So typically I like to put a compressor in. The blue compressor is really nice. The blue compressor, and then there's a blue compressor with a treble control. I like the blue compressor. I don't like cranking the sustain up. I think I like it down at like 20 or 22%, and it kind of balances the string. Especially if I go to the neck pickup. And this is where we're talking about that guitar input. I can try a higher value here and see if I get a little bit of brightness on the neck. So let's look at, actually, here's the neck with 3.5 megs, 3.5 megs. Let's go to 22K and do the same thing. Brings the overall volume down, but it also gets rid of a lot of the highs. So you can adjust it. Depends on the amp. So I might come back and mess with that when we get done. Here's the thing. Each one of these blocks on the HD500 takes up processing power. Now, if you have a 500X, you can put as many things in these blocks as you want. If you have a 500, you really can't. You're limited because there are certain models or certain effects in here that use a lot of DSP, essentially, digital signal processing. So with this particular thing, I don't want to put a blue comp in here and then a booster to give me my distortion when there's a boost comp pedal here that does both the compression. Granted, it's not the same compression, but it gives me a boost as well as the compression, and it's something I'm going to leave on. So I love the boost. When you put the boost in, here's your original sound. Sounds a little thin when we put the boost in. Still got the same dynamics. You can go. Then you can dig in really, really well. Can't play that. You can dig in really well. It's not completely distortion, but you can get some chunk in there. That's where the sag kind of helps too, as you can figure that out. You can add a little drive to it. I like just kind of the default setting. I just bring the comp down. I might even crank up the output a little bit and bring the drive back to like 50%. So almost like I'm trying to treat it like a clean boost. So that's what I do. But again, it's still built on this amp. Hasn't fundamentally changed that AC30 sound. That AC30 sound's still there. And you go, okay, well, that's cool, but I heard HD500 can do stereo amps. So like I heard Nigel Hendendorf uses a matchless and an AC30, so can I put a matchless and AC30 there? Yes and no. There is no matchless model in here that for some reason went away. With the DT and the X3 series, it was there, but this one, it went away. Matchless essentially is an AC3 build, just a custom one. Now you could do dual amps, and there are things that where dual amps are there. So I'm going to go ahead and send this over to my pod so it's saved. We'll call this worship tone, and we'll send it to my pod. Let me go and show you some of the dual amps that they have. So let's look at Garage Anthem. I don't like that one. These amps get weirder and weirder the further you go. So let's go So you got two amps model here. You can adjust them just like you can adjust a single amp, and it's stereo. Notice how we're missing 3 effects. And if you look at a lot of these, we're missing a couple effects blocks, and that's the reason why I don't do this, is because on an HD500, I've run out of DSP at this point. So like this album. You know, it sounds good. I like the stereo effect. It's a weird kind of flangey thing. But there's 3 effects that I can't use. And if I go to try to add something to them, let's say, let me go add a reverb, particle verb, which is heavy on the DSP. It'll let me add 1, but if I want to add another reverb, I'm out of DSP. So that happens a lot with the HD500. HD500X, not so much. So I don't like messing with these. Now there's a way to get a dual tone, and we're going to do it on our patch. We're not going to leave it. I'm just going to show you how to do it. So let me show you how to do a dual tone. I'm going to take this FX block right here. So if I touch it, it highlights this section. So it's this block. And we're going to go to a delay. We're going to go to a stereo delay. No, I'm sorry, not stereo, digital delay. We want a perfect digital signal. So not a modulated delay or anything like that. We're going to crank the mix all the way up, turn off tempo sync, and turn the milliseconds down to 20. And we want 1 feedback. So let me hit it. All right, hold on. Let me go turn the milliseconds up real quick here. Okay, so 1 feedback, 0%. All right, we're going to take that. We're going to turn that down. I'm not going to adjust bass or treble or anything like that. I'm going to throw it on this. So this is after the amp, it splits into a stereo. It was stereo going into the 4, so if you threw stereo effects, they would maintain stereo until they got to the amp, and then they would go get some to mono because the amp is not stereo. And then after that amp, there still can be stereo effects here. So it's still a stereo chain, but it's after the amp, it splits it to a left and right chain. So you can add some colorful effects, or you can move the amp and do an amp split if you want to. So if I do this, so that's with it off. This is with it on. So it has a doubling guitar effect. So if you're at a church and they have the channels and you can do a stereo send, you can absolutely do a stereo send. And then when you go to a church that you don't have a stereo send, or you've got an extra guitar player and you need to take that right channel, you can just basically switch this off and you go back to a mono sum. Everything about the patch stays the same. This is DSP that you're using, and it is a effects block that you're using. So it's kind of cool to have. I like to have another reverb block personally, but I do have a stereo setup that I use this for. But it is kind of cool because it just adds a very nice. Adds a really nice effect if it's hard panned in the room. Just kind of creates a big feel. So what I can do is we'll take this and we will copy this down here, and we will send selected over to the pod, and we will receive selected and go back to our original. So we have that just in case we want to go back to it later on. You could actually build this whole patch and then make a copy of it and then add that effect to it if you've got the DSP afterward. So, okay. So I have my boost, and then what I want to do is I want to do some little bit of distortion or overdrive for when we hit a big solo or anything like that. It's not going to be on like for an entire song, but here's like a tube drive. Yeah, so that's a good smooth drive pedal. There are other drive pedals in here. There's a tube screamer, just a regular overdrive. If you use a regular overdrive, I'd like to do where you just put the drive down at 50. Don't mess anything with these, and just kind of do a stacking. Or actually turn the drive all the way down and do kind of a clean boost with the drive pedal. So it kind of gives you just a little bit of hair. You can add a little overdrive to it. So that's one way to do it. You can do it with a vetted, let's see, distortion. There's also some fuzz box and stuff in here. So if you want to do fuzz box, you know. Don't see it being used often in the worship setting. We can try color drive, which adds a little bit of, coloring to it. So with that, it adds a lot of high end. It's very rocky. I like the tube drive. And quite frankly, I could actually go to Dynamics and actually do a vetted juice. So yeah, it's that. One of the things that I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring this down to on the mixer here. Again, this is this mixer here in line. I'm going to bring this down to 0 dB. I just leave it at 0 dB, but I'm doing it for the recording just to make sure levels are okay. So it's got a pretty good sustain on this. So I really like the Veta Juice, and you get that 60 cycle hum in there because you've put the hum back in there. A little noisy. And I walked away from my screen and bent it back from my screen a little bit. It didn't change, so it's the pedal that's noisy. But if you're doing single notes, it's good for solos. So I like to do that and put that as a solo, and I'll turn it off for the rest of this demo. The next thing I want to do is, I mean, you're playing worship, so you need a delay pedal. It's a mandatory. If you don't have a delay pedal, then why are you even here? So that's, yeah, you got to have a delay pedal. So first thing we'll do is we'll do a quarter note delay. I like it to feedback about 4 times. So if I'm playing a song in 4/4, so like 2, 3, 4, I go. Okay, so maybe just a little bit more feedback. Okay, so I almost get that very small hint of the other of the 5th one coming in. You can change the mix level, which will make the delays a little louder. With this one, I don't go. Yeah, generally go around 40. Depth is how much it modulates when it goes down. I like to turn the modulation speed down, but I like the depth. And so what it does is it's just kind of like a tape delay where it just kind of slowly fades out, although it's digital. But as it decays, it slowly gets kind of like tape generations. You can do a tape delay. There is a echo platter. There is a lot of delays in here that are you can do as a tape delay. There's literally a tape echo, so we could do that. It doesn't quite modulate the way I want it to, so that's why I like to use this. Turn that down a little bit, and so then you get a good. So you get that lovely delay. And then next you gotta, again, you're in worship, so you've got to get the Hillsong or Edge inspired dotted 8th note delay. So let me turn this first one off. Yeah, we'll do 80 beats per minute. I'm just gonna test this. So I'm looking at the tap tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, dotted 8th note. I hit ping pong. I want to do the digital delay with mod. I'll do the depth and modulation speed again. One, 2, 3, 4. Wow, I'm not even playing it right. It's supposed to sound like, you know, the epitome of it's supposed to sound like. But I don't have a lot of mix here, so I like to turn this up so the first delay is actually louder than the original note. So, and we'll take both of these delays. We're going to put them after the effects, or after the mixer. So if they have a stereo effect, they'll stay stereo, but they also don't get any of the amp distortion. So 1, 2, 3. So you got that kind of thing. Got to have all that. So the next thing I like to add is now we get some reverbs. And so I like to add a crazy reverb first. There are 2 crazy reverbs in here. And they take a lot of DSP, which is why I can't do dual amps in here. So first one is the octo, and then there's the particle verb. The octo is kind of like an organ being under your guitar. So it's like a pad. Sounds really nice. I like to bring the tone down a little bit so it's a little darker. Now I adjust the decay because sometimes I don't want it to last as long as, for short songs it's fine, but for songs with quicker transitions, I don't want it to get really muddy. So I'll bring the decay down a little bit. It'll get extended out because I'm going to add a plate reverb at the end here. So we're going to go ahead and add another reverb unit. And this reverb unit will be the particle verb. And so it's going to take the octo and plug it into the particle verb as well. And the particle verb is kind of it's more of this is an organ, this is more of a piano pad. So if I play like just the particle verb, all right, so it kind of goes a little bit further than that octo. You can also make it a little unstable. And you can hear the pad is kind of going crazy. It's kind of like going out of pitch, and hazard is like the extreme of that. So I like to keep it unstable because that only makes sense. And then when you feed the organ into it for the octo, it's really great for those instances where you don't have a keyboard player. And then just to kind of glue it all together, I like to add another reverb, and that would be a, see, too much DSP, so I can't add my favorite reverb, which would be the spring reverb. So I'll go to a plate, which is a nice reverb, and I'll add a little bit of that. And it's great when you're 1, 2, 3, 4, you tap it out, get your tempo, and turn on your quarter note delay. So you get your good ambience patches there. Now you can take this, you know, insane if you want to turn everything on and you do kind of a slow BPM. You can do some volume swells with the volume knob on your guitar. So try it with the other pickup. Better if you have a volume pedal, which I do. You can throw a volume pedal in here, like this last effects thing. You could go volume and throw it in, you know, somewhere in the chain. I don't like to do that because I have my own volume pedal. It takes up an effects rack. And let's see, can I do another? Well, here, let's save this. So send selected worship tone. Let's copy this worship tone down here and we'll send selective, and we will copy that one down here and we'll send selected. And so we have 4 copies of this tone. Send selected, and then oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, send selected over to that, and you can send selected over to that. So trying to figure out, remember how to do a copy. Let me turn the guitar down real quick here. All right. Downside of that hum. Weird. Don't know where that hum's coming from. It's probably my setup. Let's see. An important thing to note on the Veta Juice model, once you turn it on and you get that hum cranked up, it's weird as it actually adds a little hum to it. Tube Drive doesn't. Yeah, that was weird. Tube Drive, or that thing, added a hum to it. And I actually had a hum the last time I tried to use that thing, and I didn't know where it was, and it probably was that. So, that is strange. I did not know that. So let's just go to tube drive. That's more dependable, honestly. So let's do. So. Yeah, that'd be a good lead. That's fine. So I don't want any noise in there. You know, sometimes these things emulate it too well, and they actually add noise that was in the original. We'll see. This is when your guitar goes out of tune. Yeah. So there's so many different things you can do with a pod. This is just kind of a very basic overview of it. What I wanted to do is let's see if we can add that delay, that little dotted or that little 20 millisecond delay into it. So let me do delay DSP. So it's definitely right. I can't do that. If I get rid of my plate reverb and I do DSP or I do a delay, then I'll have enough DSP. So this is kind of the give and take. So let me do my dynamic delay, digital delay, and feedback 0, 20 milliseconds, and we'll throw it in here, and you can kind of hear the difference between the two. So kind of once you add the delays and the stereo effects, you know, it doesn't quite add to, it the same way, which is why I don't do it anymore. I mean, you can do it, but I find that plate reverb to be a lot better. So let me do. Or let's see, what can we do? Can we do an analog delay with modulation? And do a whole note delay. So yeah, you can do that to glue it all together. I think I like the plate reverb better. It's just a little kind of like stupidly simple plate, or we could do even a chamber. Well, and got to put it back over here. So you can do that. The other thing you can do that's really cool is you can do, you have to move the delays up in front of the amp to do this. But you can do where the we mono sum the channels so they're no longer stereo. So we're losing our stereo in order to do this. We get it back with the plate reverb, but we lose it in the grand scheme of things. And what you can do is you can set these delays to completely mix, so they're just delay, or not delays, reverbs, to completely mix. So if they're 100% mix, then what you hear you get kind of a pad. So it's kind of cool, but you can always bring the guitar back in and control. So the best part about this is you can take a volume pedal and put the volume pedal, so volume pedal right there. And this wouldn't work with one in front of the cabinet. You have to use a virtual one. But if you did a volume pedal and you turned off, or you tied it to volume pedal, and you turn it to expression 1, you could put the guitar back in and pull the volume out. Keyboardist for a day, you know. They're a little slow, so I'd change the dwell, and I would drop the pre-delay down. Pre-delay in the chamber is fine. Maybe give it a little pre-delay so it's not a harsh attack. And then you can use your volume pedal for the overall system. You can use it just to, like, if you have a separate volume pedal and you plug it in line before the pod, you can get your you can control the volume on the whole mix, and then just control your guitar. So that's kind of a cool effect, and that's the kind of the benefit of having these like split paths here. So I really kind of dig this, where you can just be a keyboard player. So yeah, definitely some options there. I like putting them at the end and not messing with that type of thing. But it's kind of cool that you could, build a patch and let's say, we save this. So send selected to that. Let's receive selected from the line 6. So this was my first one with all the stuff, although I got to get rid of my Veta juice. I got to go back to my tube comp. 53, 56, 50, maxed out, low drive. No, not tube comp. What am I thinking? Tube drive. 53, 56, 50. So this could be my main. So it's got all the guitar and everything in it, but then I can switch to patch B, which then has that volume effect. We can throw that. We can change the order of these and throw it back. So, and right about here is where my pod likes to crash. Once it's built, it's fine. But the pod was never designed to mess with these things while you're recording on it. So I was having the same problems earlier today. It just takes a little longer to process it. But you can build those patches, and it's kind of cool. You can do a lot of different things with this. Like I said, you can break the whole chain up to where, you can have no amps and have an acoustic going through the left side and a vocal going through the right side. If I were to show you, send selected, just sending it to the pod before it crashes. Let's see if I can pull up my my preset. Nope, it's broken now. So again, can't record and mess with this at the same time, at least for more than an hour. Let's see if I can pull up my acoustic and vocals. Probably can't, because the pod's probably choking. But you can do vocals through one channel and acoustic through another, so I can add that kind of, there you go. This is my vocals. There's no amp. I have a 11 or LA2A compressor for vocals. I have a reverb for vocals, and I'm sorry, this is for the acoustic. So an LA2A for the acoustic. I have a delay if I need it. I have a octo reverb and a plate reverb. So that's chain 1, an LA2A for my vocals. And then I have 2 of these smart harmonies, which basically, if I start singing into my vocals, I can basically select the key A major, F sharp major, and it'll give me a third up or a third down. So if I go here, I can go to a third down or a third up, a third down, and I get background vocals. So it's kind of cool. I don't use it quite as much anymore because I actually have an acoustic amp that actually just listens to what I'm playing, and it'll give me the third up or the third down based off that. So it's a little easier. I don't have to go in through here and set up the keys and match my keys to the songs I'm playing. But in a pinch, it can do that. So yeah, this thing is super strong. The last thing I want to show, let's go back to the worship guitar one and let's see if it'll let me reload that one patch that we've been working on. The last thing we need to do is set the controllers. So which switches on the pod do what? Because we want to treat this like it's stomp box mode. So I'm going to go back to that first tone, which it's not going to play back because it's glitchy, which is fine. But we're going to go to controllers. And so by default, all these controls go to whatever order you built here. Well, so in my case, I don't want to turn off the boost comp. So I'm going to go to the boost comp here in model, and I'm going to say no foot switch. I want that to be on the entire time. So I don't want to be able to accidentally turn it off. So I took that off foot switch 1. And then tube drive, I'm going to go ahead and put tube drive over to foot switch 1. So I'm going to do that. So that will be my boost for a solo. And then for myself, I think I'm going to keep plate reverb on at all times, but I want to be able to turn that off. So I'm going to move that over to foot switch 4. So I'm sorry, I'm still on tube drive. So put that back to foot switch 1. Plate reverb, I want to put that on foot switch 4. And particle verb, I want to put that on foot switch 8. Octo verb, I want to put that on foot switch 7. Digital delay, so this is the 8th note delay. I want to put that on foot switch 6. And digital delay, the quarter note one, I want to put that on foot switch 5. And so what I have is I have down here, I have delay, quarter note delay. I have my 8th note delay. I have an octo and particle verb. And then I have a plate reverb that I'll probably not mess with, but just in case I can turn it off. And then if I need to go into a solo, I've got the tube drive. So I like my delays set up down here so I can switch them on and off as needed. And this is physically on the board. And then I've got to the right of this particle verb, I have the tap tempo and loop switch. So I can tap tempo, my particle verb, and get some cool particle verb effects. Or a tap tempo, I'm sorry, not particle verb effects, but delay effects. I can get those cool effects and make sure that they're in key and everything like that, or not key, but time. So, and so I just working from left to right, I always go delay to reverbs, because it's basically how my brain works, is this flow, this path. But sometimes it gets jumbled up when you rearrange things. You can also make these switches do multiple things where, you can say, hey, I want to go all crazy out with all the reverbs all at once on one switch. You can move them all to switch F8, and as long as they're all on, you can trigger them. Or the other thing is if you wanted to say, okay, let's plate reverb, I'm going to leave that off, and I want crazy reverbs on foot switch 8, and say, okay, here is octo, I want to put that on foot switch 8, and I just want to toggle between my reverbs on foot switch 8. So let's say plate is off. I can put that also on foot switch 8. So what ends up happening is I toggle between them. So plate is on, and I get no crazy reverbs, but then I hit FS8, and now I get crazy reverbs. So it's kind of cool. So you can just kind of switch a few things back and forth. It makes the switches very useful. So quite frankly, it's not what I want to do, but it is an option. I like to have everything on its own individual switch, but if you wanted to do group switches, you definitely could. So other than that, there isn't really a whole lot. You can load set lists and stuff like that. That's what that extra tab is for. There's controls for line 6 link. If you want to do things where you have like the multiple patches that you're going to switch to, the last thing I would just recommend is go into the mixer settings and make sure trails is turned on all those patches. And that means if you have like a delay that when you play it, it rings out and kind of, fades out for, let's say, like the delay for the quarter, it plays 4 quarter notes before it disappears. You don't want to switch patches and then have that delay disappear. So we can turn on trails and it'll just kind of ring out and keep processing that. So yeah, that's what Trails does. The one thing to think about though is if you are switching from like A to B, if you switch amps, you're going to get a drop in a very split second drop in signal because you're now switching from a different model. And now it's got to recalculate all of its algorithms and stuff like that. If you're switching to just a variation of this same patch, you know, like ours where we moved the reverbs over to the left side, it may or may not click out. It probably won't because it's not really changing the DSP and how it's processing. It's just signal path. So just you know, just a quick thing to keep in mind if you're switching from like a Fender twin reverb to a, you know, Marshall half stack, there's going to be a dropout in tone when you hit that switch. So that's why I like to keep everything in either one or two tones, and I can play or work with those tones any way I want to. So any questions, put them in the comments, but I think that'll wrap this tutorial up. Thanks. Have a good one.